Canada's Justin Trudeau remains a leader under siege as hundreds of angry protesters rally outside the government's cabinet retreat as the Freedom Convoy that paralysed Ottawa a year ago rears its head again. We've also got the southern border open again, and now Canada is being besieged with over a 700% increase coming across the border, and it's definitely not Canadians. We've got Ukraine saying tanks for the tanks as US Abrahams and European Leopards are on the way. Russia is about to send 300,000 green recruits as Russia's Wagner group is accused of atrocities, and the racial tension grows in the US as 5 black cops beat a man to death, and it was all captured on camera. So much going on. And of course, joining us once again is our North American and European correspondent all the way from Canada, Michael A. Chabon. Welcome, Michael.
Michael, thanks for allowing me to be with you today.
Now, Michael, where do we start? What a lot going on.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Canada is usually a peacekeeping country. We're generally not too vocal. But our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, decided to have a cabinet retreat, take all his key people away and start to figure out what he had to do. Well, he went to a town called Hamilton, which is just about an hour south of Toronto, where I live. And he was greeted by protesters. They were carrying Canadian flags and American flags. They were yelling. They were described as hostile, if one would say. There were profanities and heckling, and there were loud demonstrations. Well, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they decided they were going to try and pull a fast one. So they moved the cars as if he was going to leave to the back of the restaurant, hoping that all the protesters would go. Now, when I say all the protesters, there's about 125 to 150, but they were loud and they were vocal. Half of them went to the back and half stayed in the front. And then suddenly Trudeau emerged with about 30 RCMP cops and tried to walk across the street to the hotel, which was across from the restaurant. Well, he was greeted by more heckling and more yelling. And it was seen that there was Trudeau with an indignant smile and sensitive to many of the objections that people were saying. And these are demonstrators who were still upset about what happened in the Freedom Convoy. They were also very much mad about certain things that he had done and is employed in the way that he's running the country. I mean, if you recall, in February 2022, it was the Freedom Convoy that was in Ottawa, basically shut down Ottawa. I was there for 5 days for an American network, and I was doing 5 or 6 hits a day. They were upset at Trudeau for freezing bank accounts, COVID lockdowns for truck drivers who couldn't cross the border to do their business. He's now since introduced Bill C-11, which is an online censorship bill, talking about a gun buyback program, which is angering farmers and legitimate gun owners, because here in Canada, in the same way as it is in the States, it's black on black crime, and basically the guns are coming from the United States illegally. Today, Trudeau battles low polls. I mean, half of Canadians, about 49%, wanted an election, and they're frustrated with the way that he's running the country. In April of this year, 2023, it'll mark 10 years that Trudeau has been the leader of the Liberal Party, 8 of which he was as Prime Minister. And 54% say Trudeau should step down as Liberal leader. And the newly minted Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, he calls Canada broken. And he basically says that he's the voice of anger and the voice of change, and that things must change. I mean, since January 2022, interest rates in Canada have been hiked 9 times to the current rate of like 4.5%, which is the highest since 2007. I mean, if you're a millennium and you look at interest rates like that, that has assisted, unfortunately, in making inflation higher, which now is at 6%. So the average house in Canada is worth $1 million. The rental market has gone up by 24% in cost. So people are really feeling the squeeze above and beyond food, etc. And if interest rates go to 7%, which is not unheard of, that means the market may be just under 8%, which means people are going to lose their houses. Many of them that will double what their mortgage rates are. People are also very concerned. And to add, and my final point on this, to add vinegar to baking soda, if you wish, Trudeau just announced a $700 million taxpayer-funded foreign aid package, you ready, for the advancement of global gender equity. and other liberal efforts. So this is like the wrong time for $700 million given out to another country when you should be taking care of things in the country and what's happening. And the conservative leader, Polyev, is primed and ready to fight and win. So Trudeau's got a bit of an uphill battle, to say the least.
Yeah. Now, speaking of other countries outside of Canada having an impact, the US's southern border, is the US become just a transit point now for a lot of the illegal immigrants?
Well, it's a terrible circumstance. They believe that there's some 500 million illegal aliens. In New York, there's about 42,000 who are living in a hotel. And the New York mayor wanted to put them into a shelter and take them out of these hotels, which are $500 a night hotels, because they wanted to put families in there. Well, these illegals said they don't want to leave because they think the other place that they're going to is substandard. They get free subway tickets, free ferry tickets, free food, etc. And now they're saying that they think it's substandard. So there's becoming a real big divide now. But the story that actually hit just recently, which was very surprising, consider New York State, Vermont, New Hampshire, New England. These represent the northern border of the United States. CBP, which is a Customs and Border Patrol, reported an increase of 743% in the last 3 months alone of northern border illegal crossings into the United States. That's from Canada. Now, we have severe winters here, as you may know, but this has never been a situation before. It's absolutely astounding. In 2021, there was 27,108 illegal crossings from that northern area, from Canada through the northern area. In 2022, it was a record, over 109,000. And in the last 3 months, October, November, December of 22, we're in February now, it's been 42,645 people. That's a record. So the southern border, which is open, and which actually they're trying to impeach Mayorkas now, because now that the Republicans are in charge of the House. But if you think the southern border, which is totally open, is about 3,000 kilometers in length. CBP, the Border Patrol, they have 18,000 agents that are there. The northern border, that border I was talking about, New York and etc., is over 8,000 kilometers, and they only have 2,000 agents. So immigration through the northern border, many people have died, and these are not Canadians who are doing it. If you can imagine, Canada still maintains, if you're a Mexican and you want to travel to Canada, fly to Canada, you don't need a visa. But then all of a sudden you land in Canada, you claim a refugee status or asylum, or you just take your bags and try to flood from the northern to the southern border using the northern border access through Canada. I mean, it's creating a really big problem. And I'm seeing there's going to be some changes, I think. But unfortunately, Trudeau doesn't have the balls to be able to reinstate that or say certain things on that issue, because, I mean, that's a very liberal thing. Hold hands and sing Kumbaya. But thank goodness the governor of Texas and several other southern states decided to send those migrants to New York in buses, because that's what's really ignited. The media can't ignore it anymore, and it's becoming more of a thing. But to think that we will be talking about illegal immigrants from Iran, Pakistan, China, Colombia, etc., coming from Canada, 109,000 of them last year, and invading the United States from the north. That's
and now we've finally seen US and Germany sign off on giving Ukraine their much needed tanks, and it seems to have angered old Putin a little bit.
Well, one of the things that I mean, Joe Biden said something, I think it was like 2 years ago. He said the United States is never going to send tanks because that's a signal of World War III. That was really the fear. As soon as America sends tanks, people think that it's arming Ukraine too much. Well, in actual fact, Germany and a couple of other European countries committed to send tanks as soon as Biden committed 31 M1 Abrams tanks. Now, 31 tanks is no big thing. Abrams tanks are very difficult to maintain. Excellent vehicle. There are as many strategic elements within that tank that is protection, so they can't get bombed or penetrated. But they're only sending 31 of them. But the Europeans would not move to send their Leopard tanks or their I forget, the Challenger 2 tanks, until basically the Americans committed. And so now the European Union, per se, loosely, is going to send about 321 tanks. So those are the Leopard tanks and the Challenger 2 tanks, which are very, very good machines, very well distributed all through Europe. And that's going to be the element that's hopefully going to make a difference. I mean, Vladimir Zelensky said that the status now is Russia is just took a little bit of a pause in starting to rearm itself and reassess what it's going to do and a potential surge. Typically, Russian military fights and problems, they tend to throw like a mass of people, so they swarm large military groups at the people that they're fighting with. They just conscripted about 300,000 troops about 5 months ago, and they're just going to be finishing their basic training, and they're going to be thrown into the fodder. I mean, unfortunately, Russians military look at their soldiers as collateral damage. So there's going to be a lot of a surge, and it is hopeful that the tanks, the anti-aircraft missiles, and a bunch of other things that are happening from both the European Union and the United States is going to help stop it. But there is a vigilante group that has been documented as doing terrible war crimes. And there's lots of organizations from Europe that are calculating and documenting all the horrible crimes that are happening. And you just don't want to escalate it to the point that it comes to the red button. But, this is, it's probably 190 days now, just over a year. And I think the Ukrainians, if I recall, have lost about 50,000 troops who have died, whereas the Russians are well over 100,000. So this is terrible, and everything that the Russians touch, they're destroying. So it's a long way back, and I think everybody's dug in a little deeper now.
Yeah. Now, the racial tension is growing in the US again as 5 black cops beat a man to death. The footage was horrific. It was reminiscent of the Rodney King, and it just seems to be a reoccurring thing. But these were 5 black cops, and I've seen reporting saying this is what happens when some of the affirmative action, and you get less than well-equipped to do the job people in. Where do we stand with this, Michael?
So did you see that in Australia? Did you see the footage? Yeah. So this was 5 bullies, 5 gangs doing a street land, beat the crap out of this poor guy. There is nothing that one can say that it can excuse that. There is no tactic. There is no police force that condones it. There's no police officer that sees what those 5 officers did as anywhere close resembling police restraint. One of the biggest problems was that there was not a supervisor there. If a supervisor was there, that would have been someone who said, everybody stop. I mean, there were many circumstances that led to that, but none of it is excusable. And I mean, a 29-year-old guy, Tyree Nichols, in Memphis, Tennessee, basically the police officers tried to stop him. He went on a slow chase. So when you see them getting out of their cop cars, it's not a standard stop. They've got their guns already drawn. They pull this guy out of the vehicle in a nature of violence. They pepper spray him. He's screaming. He won't submit to be handcuffed, and he wants to run home, and he escapes. They have like a foot chase, and they eventually come upon him where they're able to stop him. The situation that is different here is that you see the body cam footage from these 5 police officers, and you see one perspective. It doesn't look good, but the worst images, there was a community poll camera which was put there by the city to monitor high crime areas. And when this altercation took place, that camera panned and gave you a wide, high look of the whole interaction. And I mean, regardless of what this gentleman did, regardless of what this gentleman said, regardless of the frustration that these 5 black police officers had in having to apprehend him, they were part of the Scorpion group. That high camera shows that while the man is down, One police officer kicks him in the head twice. Another man gets a metal baton out and hits him. And then, as he is still crying and still half standing, another police officer gives him, I think it was 4 lethal punches to the head. What was reported to the medical team, to the fire team, was that he was pepper sprayed. And where there is, again, more neglect is as they're propping Tyree against the police car. Medical attention is not being addressed and evaluating him, what was wrong. And the police officers aren't doing them. Whereas once he's subdued, I mean, like I said, there is nothing that excuses the way they beat the crap out of this guy. Nothing, zero, no excuse whatsoever. But there is some culpability, if one would say, from the top down, that there wasn't a supervisor that was immediately dispatched. Who knows what kind of supervisory elements have been evaluating that Scorpion group. I don't care how frustrated you are. If you're given the privilege to serve as a police officer, you have to have restraint. Once the person is down on the floor, I mean, some police officers, it's just like a fish. Let the fish flop and flip all that it wants. It'll eventually run out of energy, stop screaming, and then you can address it. But you don't kick the guy in the head. You don't beat him. And you saw the horrible brutality. The one thing that is different about this and many others is it's not a white police officer on black victim crime. So there has been restraint. The family, his parents have been amazing the way they've encouraged everybody not to destroy everything, to destroy the inner city. But there are some questions as to the affirmative action of pushing police officers through and putting them in positions of control when they don't necessarily have, number one, good supervisory overseeing, and number two, maybe are a little green to be given that kind of power. But he was laid to rest today as we speak. And there's a talk about the resurgence of the George Floyd bill, which basically is a bill in the United States that says to outlaw police use of chokeholds and a bunch of other techniques, which is actually, and the other one is that police officers would not be immune to being sued. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, the American society is the most litigious society in the world. They sue for everything. So the police officers has to be given some form of protection. But like I said, there was nothing that one can say that can excuse this. But those 5 officers in no way represent police forces and law enforcement that work in the States. I just, as a final point, I created a television series called Battle Against Crime, which I created here in Canada, which is reminiscent of Cops, if you wish, where I did ride-alongs. And I spent 7.5 months in the backseat of police cars right across Canada with different police forces and cities, from Vancouver all the way to Halifax. And I will tell you, the disrespect that these police officers continually receive from what we call shit rats, if you'll pardon the expression, is terrible. Whereas you and I would not stand for someone spitting at you and saying the things that they do, but you have to have restraint because you're given the power of arrest. And I understand the frustration, but again, there was nothing that can be said for the videotaped evidence that we saw of this poor man being beaten, then not being attended. And then when they finally got him to the hospital, he lived for 2 days and then he died. So it's just terrible.
Hopefully justice will be served and the family will cope as best they can, but fingers crossed it doesn't escalate into a community turning on itself. We'll have to leave it there.
You saw what happened in 2019 when America burned. I mean, there was billions and billions of dollars, and many of the places that were burned in all these protests were in low income, generally racially fortified areas. And there's many of those businesses have not come back. And then the backlash now of trying to defund police and take power away from police has resulted in a crime rate in the United States. People are not visiting New York because of carjackings and robberies, and then no cash bail because you're saying, well, it's the white guy who's saying that you got to charge cash. He can always put up the cash to get bail, and the black guy who's charged can't. Well, the unfortunate reality of that is then you have a turnkey where you get charged with something, you get right back out, and you do the crime again. So America is in a bit of a flux right now, and this does not make the job of trying to resolve that any better. It just creates more of a divide, both a racial divide and a divide between law enforcement and the enforcement of law and order. That's why many people are going to states like Texas and Florida, where they have cash bail and where the cops are well funded and are respected, and shit like that doesn't go down. And but we have to say thank God for the police cameras, because that's what basically showed what happened here to this poor man.
Yep. All right, Michael, we'll have to leave it there and we'll chime back in next week. Have a great one up there in Canada.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to the viewers on The Informer.